So I didn't want to just do a tier list, and I didn't want to just do a Q&A, so here's both. Thank you so much for 4K subscribers, by the way. This was going to be a 3K subscriber video, and by the time this actually comes out, it might be a 5K subscriber video, which is just insane. All of the support you guys have been showing me recently is just incredible, and I hope I will express how happy I am with the situation in my answers to some of these questions and stuff, but suffice it to say, you guys are great. But the way this video is going to work is I'm going to answer a couple questions, then do a couple tiers on the tier list, and we'll just see what happens from there. This video isn't scripted, so you're getting a kind of different JBat here, but we'll see what happens. But as for that tier list, you might have been reading the tiers on the side and noticed that these do not in fact say S, A, B, C, D, F. Instead, we've got JBat approved at the top, Sigmar be praised, Protagnia, Neutralia, Antagnia, and then lastly, Enemy of Belgium. I'm not explaining what these mean. But the first fantasy subgenre that we're going to rank is going to be steampunk. Steampunk is a Neutralia for me. I like the aesthetic of steampunk, but I haven't really engaged with any media that was steampunk that particularly got me somewhere. I'm sure there's really good steampunk out there. I just haven't happened to encounter it quite yet, but I still like the vibe, so yeah, C tier. Next is going to be swashbuckling fantasy. I've encountered this a fair few times, and it's pretty great. Very piratical, very swashbuckling, skullduggerous, what have you. The vibe is very strong. That's going to be a Sigmar be praised tier. And following that, we've got sword and sorcery. I always associate this with that kind of classic, sort of like Conan the Barbarian style fantasy artwork. It inspired a lot of the genre in terms of its art direction in a way that even things like Tolkien really didn't at first. So sword and sorcery is sort of the foundation of what fantasy looks like, at least in my mind. Easy Sigmar be praised here. So next we're going to do a couple questions from Shadowrunner, one of our top patrons. And the first of those is, how did you come into contact with pencil and paper, 40K, world building, gaming, etc., and what made you start creating? So as for creating, I've always been doing that. I've been drawing pictures and writing stories in notebook paper since I was like 5. As far as pencil and paper, that is the fault of my editor, Yamez, who wanted to play D&D, and I was like, yeah, sure, okay, that sounds like something to do. And now it's several years later, and I've been the perpetual DM ever since. Next, as far as 40K is concerned, you can blame one of my other friends on that, who bought the 9th edition starter set with me, the one with the Necrons and the Space Marines. I went Space Marines, he went Necrons, and thus the plastic crack addiction began, and I've got like 6 armies. And then as far as Warhammer Fantasy goes, just because I want to throw that in there, Total Warhammer games and Vermintide. Love those games to death. That got me into that universe. As far as gaming goes, that's going to be the Wii, specifically the Wii bundle that had Mario Kart Wii in it, and then I think also Wii Sports, but I think all of them had Wii Sports, so what do I know? But I played a lot of Mario Kart Wii. Next question is, how many stories do you have written by now, and how many of them would you consider good, and why? I've got dozens, but I'd say only 3 are really up to my current standard. That'd be the first novel of my series that I'm working on, a horror short story that I wrote fairly recently, and it's in the Discord actually, and then a detective short story I wrote last semester for a class that I think is pretty alright. But the reason I only say 3 of them are decent is because you should pretty much always be like improving, your taste will always be changing as well, so the sorts of things that you consider good from your own work, especially if you're fairly self-critical, is going to change a lot. So while I've written a ton, only a couple, I'd say, are things that I'd ever willingly show to anybody. Next question is, which world setting do you enjoy the most? Between sci-fi, fantasy, horror, grimdark, urban fantasy, etc. For me, it's going to be fantasy, usually with a dark, gritty, or historical twist. Maybe not quite grim-dark, because real, literal definition grimdark is kind of too miserable to be enjoyable. But I do like the vibes that comes with something where it doesn't feel like it's hopeless, but that hope is precious and rare. However, I do like other genres as well, of course. I like sci-fi, but I'm very picky with it. Not huge on urban fantasy. In fact, I'm about to rank it. But I'm getting way more into horror. My dad and I have been watching tons of horror movies over this past year, and I'm finding that I really like horror, which is why one of those 3 good stories I mentioned is a horror short story. Next is going to be our ranking for 3 more tiers. So the next of those is going to be urban fantasy, which I'm going to have to put into Antagnia. I'm just not really that into it. There are a couple ways that I think that fantasy can be put into a real-world setting, but urban fantasy is just very rarely it for me. I kind of associate it with bad YA, even though YA is its own tier we'll be talking about. There just really aren't a lot of urban fantasies that get to me too much as things that I love, and a lot of what I've experienced of it is just not great. But after that, we've got vampire fantasy, which, despite the fact that vampire fantasy is just as overdone as urban, I'm going to actually put this one in Sigmar Be Praised tier, because when vampire fantasy is really good, it's really good. The source I cite there is the Castlevania anime. That show is really amazing. And vampires are also just really cool fantasy monsters when they're not the Twilight kind. Next is wuxia, which I hope I said sort of correctly. That's an easy Protagnia tier. I've watched a couple movies that are wuxia, experienced a couple stories that are wuxia. It's not a genre I'm going to go out of my way to seek out, but every time I've experienced it, it's been at least 7 out of 10, if not better, which most of the time it is. Next are going to be more Shadowrunner questions, the first of which is, do you have any community events or interactions planned or in mind? And then he says, since we're still small here at JBat, I would consider it manageable. I would love to, but I didn't think I would get this far, especially not this fast. So yes, I definitely will, but I don't have anything too specific planned yet. I'd like to maybe stream or like play games with members of the Discord. Like I know Vermintide has a Twitch mode, and that sounds really fun. But I didn't expect to be here, so I don't know specifically yet. But if you have ideas, request them to me, probably in the Discord where I will see them better, and we can probably make it work. Next is, you talked about your magic system in your world a few times. Did you create a whole system, or is it just a modified version of another system? So I would say it's vaguely based off of how magic works in Warhammer Fantasy, but aside from it being sort of elemental and that sort of aspect of it being dangerous to use, a lot of the differences sort of fall apart. So I'd say that it's more or less my own, in particular with the specific elements that I chose. I've never really seen that combination before. I'm not going to say it's, you know, the newest thing ever. It's not. There's nothing new under the sun, but I'm pretty happy with it being its own thing. Regardless of this, where did you start building it, and will there be any opportunities to play some pencil and paper in this world? So this world started actually because I wanted to make a trading card game when I was in high school, like 6 or 7 years ago. But then I got more into fantasy after I inevitably dropped the trading card game idea. And I also wanted to write a novel, so I used those old notes in world building for that game as a basis. And then I built it up from there with Incarnate to make maps, and then threw up a giant Google Doc for lore as I started writing the novel itself. So it's sort of built up into its own thing. But you ask if there will be opportunities to play pencil and paper in this world. The answer to that is hopefully yes, but I can't put an ETA on it. I'm currently working on developing basically its own system for this world. It's off of WFRP 4E, but I find that as my group and I play our system more, we change it further and further from WFRP. So I think eventually it'll be enough of its own thing that it'll be worth releasing on its own. But whenever that happens, maybe people in the Discord can help us playtest it. But it's all very theoretical at the moment. And then the last Shadowrunner question before the big one that I'm saving to the end. A lot of big questions are being put at the end just because they'll take more elaboration. Is when Ninjago lore video? I've seen so many Ninjago comments after that one video that it'll have to happen at some point. I don't know when, but I will do a Ninjago lore video eventually. I had Ninjago Legos as a kid. I watched the show for an amount of time. Maybe I'll dig them out, rewatch parts of the show. I don't know, but Ninjago lore video eventually. And before we move on to more tier listing, we've got a question from Nico, who is another patron of mine, who asks, are you secretly Batman? If I said yes, it would no longer be a secret, so I have to say no regardless of what the truth is. So for the next tiers, we've got YA fantasy. This is going to be an Antagnia for me. There is good YA fantasy. That is not what I'm arguing. I'm just never going to read it. Next is ranking alternate history as a tier of fantasy. I'm going to put this at Neutralia. And the reason I say that is because while I like alternate history, I like it on the conceptual level of thinking through the ways in which history could have gone well. But I find that the actual stories that are written in alternate history tend to not actually be very good as stories. They're good as concepts, but they don't tend to actually do the story part itself quite as well. After that is going to be magical realism, which Maybe surprising considering where I put urban fantasy. This one goes straight into JBat approved, and that is like 90% because of Beloved by Toni Morrison, which only has these very slight fantasy elements. It's sort of deniable, especially for a while. I'm biased just because the book itself is incredible. Maybe a lot of the rest of the genre isn't that good, but I don't care. Beloved sweep, JBat approved. Next come questions by Komikath. Those are going to be, what is your most and least favorite trope? Off the top of my head, I think my favorite trope is like magnificent bastards for villains. And then the worst would probably be power of friendship, which I think Brennan Lee Mulligan explained best by saying that if the power of friendship is enough to save lives, that means that any time somebody dies near their friends, that their friendship wasn't good enough to save them, which is kind of messed up. And then, of course, even beyond that, there's the whole friendship as a power thing is just so tropey, and it just, it's always childish, but it's never childish in that kind of like fun way, really, or in that like whimsical way. It's always at best, power of friendship is at best like a okay sort of deal. Then, what's your favorite sci-fi show? The X-Files. Easy. I love The X-Files. I've seen it like twice over, watched it with my dad. Big fan. Next, thoughts on Tolkien and the legacy of his works. Generally positive. I like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, though, was never the thing that really pulled me all the way into fantasy, as is proven by our generous commenters. Every time I talk about Lord of the Rings, they always add new things to the conversation, and I'm like, oh, I had no idea that that was the case. Because while I read the Lord of the Rings books, I didn't pursue them too much further than that. So my general opinion on Tolkien is that he's great. I'm glad he made fantasy into a thing that is popular, that people know about, but his flavor of it isn't like my favorite per se. And then, of course, there's the fact that while he made fantasy popular, he also made bad imitations of himself popular, which isn't ideal. Though, of course, it should be noted that that's not his fault, of course. It's just how it turned out. Next is, would you ever consider doing an inverse of the 7 Deadly Sins video? Which, of course, is to say doing it with the 7 Heavenly Virtues. I would like to. The 7 Deadly Sins video was probably one of my favorites to make, but I'd have to figure out, and this is just being completely transparent, I would have to figure out how to, like, market it, so to speak, because 7 Heavenly Virtues just isn't like a thing people search for, really. But if I can figure out how to twist it into a video that, like, I can put out there and have at least sort of confidence that it'll do well, I would absolutely love to. So now we've got a couple more tiers to do. The next of those is media tie-in fantasy. This basically has to be a neutralia because it so strongly depends on what the media tie-in is, and its quality is incredibly variable. The picture on it is of the Rebel Alliance sign from Star Wars. There's a lot of tie-in Star Wars stuff that's both quite good and quite bad, but the main thing I think of with this is like Warhammer, though arguably you could say that Warhammer is almost a book thing lore-wise, and then the models are extra so far as lore goes, but that's a bunch of semantics I don't really care to argue. So thinking about it in the Warhammer sense, there are, once again, a ton of incredible Warhammer novels: Betrayer, First Heretic, Lion Son of the Forest, the Gotrek and Felix novels, but then there's also a bunch that's terrible, so I don't see anywhere else to put this tier. Next is military fantasy. That I'm gonna go tentatively with Protagnia here. Military fantasy, military fiction in general has a tendency to be kind of one note. It requires, I feel like, a certain touch to not just be the generic hoorah explosions Michael Bay if he had to convey everything through text style thing. But when done right, I do like reading about military fantasy. I mean, the Clone Commando books from Star Wars, some of those were pretty good, and I'd fairly classify those as being a style of military fantasy, so I guess that's where I'd put it. Next is mythic fantasy. Now, mythic fantasy is just kind of a weird one because I don't know that there's a super established opinion on what mythic fantasy means, but the two interpretations are that it is fantasy that relies on real myths, and then either it can or can't be in the real world. Not sure, but I'm gonna put it in Protagnia just because I as I argued in the lazy world building video, I really like seeing real myths and culture put into fantasy works, and that, at least I'm pretty sure, is an aspect of mythic fantasy, so Protagnia. Next are questions from Lilith the Catmoth. The first of those is, do you have a favorite movie? Yes. Two, I would say. The first of those is going to be the original Blade Runner. That movie is perfect. And then the other one is going to be Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is another Harrison Ford movie that I would also argue is perfect. And also better than Raiders. And also, I like Temple of Doom more than Raiders. So there's some hot takes for you. What do you do outside of YouTube? Run tabletop RPG campaigns, izuchayu ruski yazik, play games, that sort of thing. Can I have a cameo in one of your videos? Probably. DM me about it, I guess. Next come questions from Victor the Lore Seeker. What inspired you to make your own book series? Playing Fire Emblem Three Houses was the spark, but writing something kind of like it, kind of fantasy-ish, had been on my mind for a while. Three Houses just sort of provided the framework that I started with and then sort of built from there. What part of writing do you enjoy the most? World building, culture, characters, etc. World building is pretty good. I enjoy that a lot, but what it does is it sets the stage for the character moments that define good stories. So, character building, I would say. Next tiers, political fantasy. When done well, this is an easy Sigmar be praised tier, especially if we're dealing with like medieval politics. I think they're very interesting. They're very interpersonal. So definitely high tier there. Next is Portal Fantasy. For me, that's going to be Antagnia. I just kind of think of like bad isekai sort of things. I know that there are really good Portal Fantasies out there. You know, C.S. Lewis's work, I believe, is Portal Fantasy. A lot of it anyway. But it just never really appealed to me, because the perspective of the character is always sort of the same as being just a normal person who goes into a fantasy universe, so they never know what's going on. The variation, I suppose, there's not as much variation in that, and that's not inherently a bad thing. It's just not my thing. And then next is Quest Fantasy. Protagnia. I mean, fantasy in general is built, in part at least, around quest fantasy, and then most stories in general are some flavor of the hero's journey, which is a quest. So quest fantasy, I know it means something specific, but so much of fantasy is quest fantasy, it kind of just has to be Protagnia. But assuming we're talking about the D&D style, go kill the dragon, go save the kingdom from the evil king or whatever, it's just good. Sometimes it's boring, but the structure, the concept is very solid. Next question from Victor the Lore Seeker, though, is, does your world have a pantheon of gods? Yes, there are multiple pantheons, and there are several different cultures with different religions, and I'm adding more all the time. Just to make my life harder, I guess, because most of them won't even show up in the novels, and they're just for my tabletop RPG. Yes, many. Next question. For a beginner like myself, what tips might you have for someone just starting out creating their own world? So as far as world building goes, it really depends on what your goal is. If all you want is just a world to build and mess with no like ulterior end goal, then you really can't go wrong. Just experiment and have fun figuring it out. If you're creating for a tabletop RPG campaign or setting, then there you might want to focus more on setting up interesting locations and conflicts and just types of beings for players to interact with, whether it be to fight or talk with them. And if you're writing a book or any other sort of like linear narrative or even a game, don't try to draw out the whole world all at once. Start small, fill out that small area, and then kind of move out a sphere and fill it just kind of gradually. For example, with mine, I started with building out the lore and the background of one building that the story that I'm writing mostly takes place in, and then everything else kind of built out from there until I had a fleshed out continent, and only after the entire continent was like fully done did I even really worry about what was happening otherwise. Though obviously anything that directly affected that continent you probably want to do too. The point is that you want to expand slowly, so that you give yourself time to make the things you start with have depth. Next question is from Anonymous Fox. Would you ever consider doing a video about lore or writing in other pieces of media like League of Legends, Steven Universe, Game of Thrones? Yes, but my tastes are kind of specific and not very genre dependent, so it's difficult to stick on theme with them so much. It could be a little risky as video topics, especially as a video format that takes a lot of time to make. A good example would be like the Ready or Not video. It was very off topic for the channel, so it was kind of a risky pick. So that's sort of the consideration I have to have when I do that sort of thing, but I would like to. Next tiers. The next of them is Arthurian fantasy. That is Protagnia. You could argue that Last Crusade, Indiana Jones, is an Arthurian fantasy because it's about the Holy Grail, but, you know, that's kind of cheating. If we're talking about actually what people mean when they say Arthurian fantasy, it's still Protagnia. There is a lot of significance and literary tradition wrapped up in the Grail quest, and you can find it in so many stories, down to detective novels like The Maltese Falcon. The Maltese Falcon isn't a fantasy story, but it is wrapped up in Arthurian myth, with the Maltese Falcon being the Grail. It's everywhere. And for that reason, I mean, it has to be Protagnia, because Arthurian stuff shows up everywhere, even when it's never directly alluded to. Next is Assassin Fantasy. Neutralia. All I think of is Assassin's Creed. In my mind, there's like 1 or 2 good Assassin's Creed games. Black Flag is really amazing. 3's pretty good from what I've experienced of it, and I've got no idea what the rest of it. And then I haven't experienced anything that was specifically Assassin Fantasy other than that, so that's my basis of reference, and I don't feel too strongly about it. It can be cool though, so Neutralia. Then Coming of Age Fantasy. This has to be Neutralia because coming of age is just sort of a theme more than a genre. Coming of age is fine if it's done well, like anything else. Next are Saint Sir Nicholas and his questions. His first one is, why are the High Elves the best species in Warhammer? Because they have Eltharion, because they're the best non-reptilian magic users, and because they have impeccable drip, though I'm still a follower of Sigmar at heart. How do you resist burnout? I only pick topics that I'm interested in to make videos on, and I would also feel infinitely more guilt and shame for not working on YouTube than burnout for doing it. Maybe that's not healthy, I don't know, but that's how it is. Next, do you think of yourself as an educator? No, I don't think I'm any wiser than anybody else. I just know how to format my thoughts and put them into a video. What are any goals and aspirations outside of YouTube you feel like sharing? Really, at this point, they're all fairly tied to YouTube. Like one of my main ambitions is to get my novel series published, and YouTube might help me with that in some form or fashion, just sort of as an example as to how it's all sort of interconnected. Otherwise, I just want to do all the YouTube things. Namely, I want to have the ability to spend enough time on this channel that I can have a second channel and I can stream or record tabletop RPG sessions or anything like that. I want to do all the things. I've just got to get there first. How do you decide if a video was a success? My default answer to that is if it gets as many views as I have subscribers, but the definition changed after the lazy world building video at time of recording has like 80,000 views. So that one is a success, I dare say. Okay, next tiers. Dragon Fantasy, Neutralia. I love dragons, but having dragons does not determine whether I will or won't like something. Dying Earth. This might be a little controversial. This one is an Enemy of Belgium tier, because while there are specific good examples of it, I feel like generally Dying Earth fantasy, Dying Earth stories are almost always extremely hampered by the fact that you can't fulfill the promise of the genre. Because if you blow up the Earth, then the story ends in a way that almost anybody would consider unsatisfying. If you don't blow up the Earth, then the fact that the Earth might have blown up was just a stake that you set really high to make things dramatic, even though, realistically, as we all know, an audience will care about the life of one character they care about more than the entire world's worth of nameless, side characters, essentially. So for me, world exploding just doesn't work at all as a stake, personally. It has to get smaller scale to where it is affecting specifically things that I care about. the hero's hometown, the hero's family, even a specific like country or land. It has to be sort of localized into something that can be related to, or just don't really care. And then erotic fantasy. That's going to be Enemy of Belgium. I'm not the target audience. We'll put it that way. I'm not the target audience. What is your advice to other creators? Audio quality is the most important mechanical feature, full stop. Never leave dead silence for longer than you have to unless it's very purposeful, and schedule out your process for making videos like you would any other job. Make sure you like what you're doing, and as far as getting views or anything goes, I have no idea other than try to make good videos and try to have good thumbnails. Then just post until something happens. Other than that, I have no idea, because there are people infinitely more successful than me who definitely have it figured out better than I do. What are your favorite types of Legos? That's an interesting question. I had a lot of the Indiana Jones ones as a kid. I know they're still around somewhere, and I've got like the old Temple of Doom set. This would be a good question for my dad as well. He builds Legos a lot more than I do. Will you make books based on your RPG setting? My setting is a novel that I'm making an RPG out of rather than the other way around. Bear that in mind if you're looking forward to the D&Dification of fantasy video, because that will be a relevant point. To answer that from a different angle, I would like to one day release a rulebook for the system that my world is in, as I was talking about earlier, so hopefully that'll happen. Next is, do you think of YouTube as a hobby or a profession? I think of it as a hobby that I treat like a profession, because in an ideal world, that's what it'll be someday. Next is, what types of ice cream do you most enjoy? Hershey's Maple Walnut. Peach ice cream is also good, but maybe that's my Georgia bias. And then Kofeg de God asks one simple and very good question: cats or dogs, and why? I like both. I've had way more dogs, so if I had to pick one, it would be dogs. I've got a little alien creature as a pet right now, and a short-haired border collie. So I love dogs, but I also like cats a lot. I guess I would say, if I had to pick dogs, it would just be because they're a little friendlier, and I like that they actually like you. Next is going to be fantasy romance. I feel like I'd be a little more likely to read this than erotic romance fantasy, so I guess it's Antagnia tier. I'm not going to say it's because it's bad, though I do think that there's a lot of really bad romance out there, but it's not my place and it's not my genre, so that's a freebie. It's Antagnia. I also realized I should probably be moving out of the way so you can see where these go, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead. Yeah, Antagnia. Whatever. Flintlock fantasy. JBat approved. I think flintlock weapons are really cool, and I like when fantasy uses them. Particular Warhammer fantasy, which was the setting that told me that you could do that. Next is Grimdark fantasy, and that's JBat approved, but only because of Warhammer, and even then, if you're following what Grimdark is, letter of the law, then it drops several tiers. I like something that's like right on the edge of being Grimdark, but isn't like quite there. I like the misery and the suck, and it seems so thoroughly like there's no chance of winning. But if it becomes blatantly like that, and there's no hope, and there's no heroes, then it just becomes a dredge, and it becomes miserable. It's a fine line. And when Warhammer, in particular, rides that line well, it makes Warhammer one of the better settings out there. But then sometimes it becomes grimderp and is terrible, so what can you do? Now we've got the final questions, the big questions, the one that required some elaboration, so I put them later. The first of those final questions is from Shadowrunner, and he asked, what motivated you to continue making YouTube videos, as in, how did you come across downtime? So they say that saying you don't have time for things is always sort of an excuse, because unless you literally have obligations that take up all of your day, you always have time to make time for things. And I did have time to make for doing YouTube. Yes, I was spending all of my time before it doing things, but I decided that I would rather spend some of that time, which realistically was probably spent playing video games, doing this instead. And I've been able to maintain most of the rest of what I do in my life without it being too big of an issue, by just managing my time well. So if you think you don't have time for it, once again, not considering if you have like serious obligations that take up tons of your time, you probably really do have time for it, and then it becomes more about motivation and like the mechanical ability to do it. And the other thing that kind of keeps me going, aside from the like I would feel bad about myself if I was lazy about it, is that I know that this opportunity exists. I feel like it's something I can do to an okay degree. Maybe I have something to offer. So I know that if I wasn't pursuing doing YouTube, I would regret not doing it forever. So I have to do it because I know future me would be mad at me if I didn't. And then his final question from Shadowrunner is, what was your old channel about? So it was basically gaming and then just whatever random stuff I wanted to put on there. The funny thing is that even though this is the 1-year anniversary video for JBat, which I probably should have said at the beginning, but happy 1 year of JBat, I've been doing YouTube for like 9 years. Like I started in 2016 and that channel went until 2020, which actually makes me realize I've more so been doing YouTube for 5 years because there was a 5-year gap when I wasn't doing it, but it sounds cooler to say I was doing it for 9 years. You can interpret that however you want. However, on that old channel, it was extremely basic. I was doing it as like a middle schooler to high schooler. So I didn't really like do editing until 2019, and I was always bad at editing and lazy about it. That's why I conscripted my friend to do it for me. But that channel got about 200 subs overall that time. The channel was never good. There were maybe a couple okay videos. I went and rewatched some of them for the sake of this question, actually. And while the channel wasn't good, I'd say it was a valuable stepping stone, and it helped me in a lot of other ways. Mostly that I feel like it helped my like self-confidence because I was putting myself out there. I mean, now here I am being this guy who talks about elves and dwarves and stuff in front of a camera just because, and you know, I put my face out there. I try not to be too shy about stuff. And I feel like I was very, very shy, very introverted before I started YouTube, and I'm still kind of shy, kind of introverted, but not nearly as much as I was. So even aside from the ways in which the old channel helped me do better with this one, I feel like it also helped me come out of my shell a bit just as a person. Then as for our elaborative question from Komikaf, what motivated you to start making YouTube videos? There, I would say it's basically just that I always watched YouTube. I've been watching YouTube since I was probably too young to be doing so, and since well before YouTube Kids was a thing, for one. And there were just so many YouTubers that I watched. I loved the way that it was always sort of personable in a way that television wasn't. You could find videos on specific niche interests that you had where you couldn't really find things about those interests otherwise. And as I grew older, I came to appreciate the fact that when you watch a YouTuber, I mean, yes, some of the money that you give them through ads goes to YouTube itself, but a lot of it just goes to the creative, the person who's doing the thing. It's not like in some other industries where, even though it's the work of the creative person that you're really appreciating, a lot of the money is going to producers and basically money people who don't have an influence on the reason that you actually enjoyed the thing. Though, I mean, obviously they make it exist. It's not like they don't matter, but still. Final question from Lilith the Cat Moth is, how are you feeling about the channel? Great, considering recent events. I mean, I'm coming off, when I'm recording this, like this is the weekend after I posted the lazy world building video. It's got tens of thousands of views. I didn't know what to do with that as a feeling. I have no idea what's going to happen with the channel over this next year. Before that video came out, I was getting like a little worried because videos weren't doing super well, because I didn't want to stop. Now, of course, I'm definitely not going to, because it'd be stupid to stop now. But even aside from the numbers angle of it, especially as more and more people join the community and I get to talk with more people, I find that I'm enjoying it more and more because there are just so many interesting ideas that all of you have. Pretty much everybody that is in here is very positive, very earnest. We're all trying to help each other. So I'm very, very glad that I started doing this, and wouldn't take back a decision I've made thus far. Final question from Anonymous Fox, and final question of the video is, what other YouTube channels influenced you to create your own? So there are literally dozens that I could mention, but I think I have to mention the 3 that are just probably overall my favorite YouTubers, the ones who've influenced what I've done the most. And the first of those would be Scalagrim. Scalagrim, I would say, was the one who gave me the interest in the historical foundation for doing fantasy that, in my mind, has helped me take my interest in fantasy, because, oh, magic and dragons are cool, into something where I can explore these historical concepts within the bounds of a fictional world. Not to mention that I've always liked Scalagrim because he was always honest about who he was. I say was as if he's not still making videos. I still watch him. He is always honest about who he is. He will make videos because they are a thing that interests him, or they are a thing he wants to talk about. It's clear that he values doing that more than just for the sake of the paycheck, and I respect that a lot. The next YouTuber I would say would be Peanut Butter Gamer, which is very different from anybody I've talked about thus far. But Peanut Butter Gamer was probably like my OG favorite YouTuber, and I still love him to death. I watch some of his streams every now and again. He was somebody that I feel like I always related to. I mean, we're basically built the same. I just have longer hair. We're tall and thin and get compared to Shaggy, you know? But his sense of humor, I think, impacted mine a lot. The types of videos that he did on the games that I played, because while I don't talk about it a lot on the channel, I do like Nintendo games a lot. And as well, his just sort of like his earnestness, his positive attitude on like everything that he does. I just love that about him. And then my third favorite YouTuber would probably be Wendigoon. And I think Wendigoon might have been the one that eventually pushed me towards actually making a channel. And our topics couldn't be more different. He makes multi-long hour videos on cryptids and conspiracies and whatever. But aside from the actually coincidental shared appreciation for Hawaiian shirts, I just like Wendigoon because, and I think this is the shared theme between all of these 3, and it also represents what I like about YouTube, is the earnestness of personality. None of these 3 are putting on that much of a persona. Now, everybody on YouTube, including myself, puts on a persona. That's objectively true. But you can tell how far the persona is from what that person is actually like. And with the 3 that I mentioned, I haven't met them, but I get the feeling that it's probably not all that far. And because there's that lack of distance, I feel like they really achieve the promised potential of like what YouTube is. And while obviously there is the element of this sort of idea going too far where you get to things like parasocial relationships, I really do think there is an earnestness to the connection between the audience and the creator in these sorts of situations. I mean, I once again emphasize you don't want to take it too far, but I always appreciate that idea that these are people that you can speak to. And that's one thing I want to commit to, no matter where I go with this channel, is that I always want it to be the case that if you have a question or if you want advice or just an opinion on something, that I want to be able to be there to try to help you or to give you that opinion or whatever I have that counts as advice. Because for all the ways that, and I don't want to get too soppy or like sappy or like melodramatic or whatever, but for all the ways that the world finds to be miserable, I find that the way to conquer that is through human connection, basically, through people helping each other out. And even if it's in small ways, even if it's me just answering your DM about whether your map looks stupid or not, I think there's value in that. And that sort of thing is what I like about YouTube. It's what I like about those 3, that they will just honestly talk about the things that interest them. That's what YouTube should be. Before I try to get any more pretentious or, what's the word I'm looking for, insufferable about it, I think we'll cut it off there. I got more questions than I expected. This video will probably be longer than I want it to be, but that's okay. Thank you so much for the first year of JBat. I'm hoping for there to be many more. Thank you so much for 4,000 subscribers, or however many of you there are by the time this goes up. Thank you as well to all the members of my Discord who I regularly have great conversations with, who I get to see the ideas of on a daily basis, and your memes as well. My oath is that if I ever make a merch, something related to the JBat meme is going to be on there if I can come up with something clever for it. And then, of course, thank you to the patrons. I don't know why anybody would be a patron of me when I'm this small. I don't know what I'm offering that you guys like, but I appreciate it a lot. It's pretty cool. But yeah, so thank you to those patrons as well, of course. Those being Shadowrunner and Sani, my Knights of the Inner Circle, Nico, my Knight, and then my loyal Squire Greer. I hope you guys enjoyed this rambly video. That was just me getting real, I guess, for a bit there. And I didn't write down an and remember, so I'm going to sit here, and then there's going to be a cut probably until I think of what the and remember should be. And remember, the only way to lose, the only way to fail at going after your aspirations is to quit. So just don't quit.